The golden lights of the Grand Ole Opry have witnessed countless legendary voices. But there was one man who never had to shout, who never needed flashy moves. Just the whisper of a mandolin string was enough to silence an entire hall. They called him the savior of country music, an artist who never chased glitter, never needed scandals, never craved noise, and yet it was that simplicity that made him a legend. In the 1980s, Ricky Skaggs lit up Nashville with a string of #1 hits, carrying bluegrass from the hills of Appalachia back into the very heart of America. Chet Atkins once said, "He saved country music," but that light did not last. Only a few years later, Nashville itself turned its back, abandoning him in the storm of pop country's rise. A star who once stood on the mountaintop suddenly vanished into silence. And yet Ricky Skaggs refused to fall. He chose to return to his roots, to the melodies the world had already dismissed as outdated. It was a risky move, almost reckless. But from that darkness, he rebuilt an entire genre. Bluegrass, once forgotten, rose again, stronger, louder, eternal. In a world where legends are too often built on scandal, Ricky Skaggs proved something different. With honesty, with faith, with nothing but a single true note, you can live forever. Tonight, we travel back in time to uncover the turbulent journey of Ricky Skaggs. From a poor boy in Kentucky to the brightest star in Nashville, the man abandoned by fame, and finally, an immortal symbol, the keeper of the everlasting flame of bluegrass. Early life. Summer, 1954. In a remote little village called Cordell, Kentucky, a baby boy was born inside a modest wooden house. His name was Ricky Lee Skaggs. The Appalachian hills at that time were steeped in poverty. Work was scarce. Life for families like the Skaggs revolved only around the fields, the church, and the faint crackle of a radio reaching from faraway Nashville. In that world, music was not a luxury. It was the only way to keep the human spirit from feeling lost in the harshness of life. When Ricky was just 5 years old, his parents gave him a tiny mandolin. It wasn't expensive. It was the most precious thing the family could afford, bought with sweat and coins saved over many long seasons. That first night, Ricky sat on the porch, his little fingers struggling to press the strings, burning with pain, but his eyes shining with fire. Music touched the boy like a miracle. From that moment on, his life would be bound to that little mandolin, an instrument that would become his voice, speaking the words he never could. Then came 1960. Ricky was only 6 when fate called. His family took him to see a show by the father of bluegrass himself, Bill Monroe. Under the blinding stage lights, Monroe suddenly called the boy up to play with him, and there, standing beside his idol, Ricky Skaggs, barely able to read or write, picked the mandolin to thunderous applause. No one knew it then, but that night was a prophecy. The mountain boy would one day become the keeper of bluegrass for all of America. But behind that magical moment lay a childhood of hardship. The Skaggs family lived in a leaky house, winters cut to the bone. Sometimes they had to light a coal fire in the middle of the room just to keep warm. His father worked endlessly, but the money was never enough. His mother gave everything to hold the home together. Ricky learned early that to survive, he would have to rely on himself. And music, what seemed like just a child's game, became his anchor, his way of enduring and rising above poverty. As a teenager, Ricky shaped his voice in the gatherings of the church. Unlike singers who shouted, he learned to let his voice flow just enough, to blend with the community, to feel close, to feel human. That training, born out of hardship and faith, became his signature: simple, humble, unforgettable. Ricky didn't sing to impress. He sang to keep his family warm and his faith alive. By the time he was 13, Ricky could play not only the mandolin, but also guitar and fiddle with ease. But more important than any instrument, he had learned a truth. Poverty doesn't kill music. It makes music more real. Every note he played carried the weight of bread on the table, the weight of faith, and the weight of a childhood forever walking the thin line between hope and hardship. That poverty, that harshness, would shape Ricky Skaggs forever. Later, when he stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, under the dazzling lights backed by a powerful band, he still sang the same way he did in his wooden house in Kentucky. Simple, restrained, never a wasted note. And that is the true power of Ricky Skaggs, a voice that doesn't need to shout to make all of Nashville fall silent. Early career. In the late 1960s, when Ricky Skaggs had just stepped into his teenage years, music was no longer just a pastime in that little wooden house in Kentucky. The poor boy had now become a local prodigy, his mandolin playing so skilled it left grown men in awe. But the road ahead was uncertain. In Appalachia, dreams rarely stretched beyond the ridgeline. And for Ricky, could that tiny mandolin truly open a way out? In 1970, at just 16, Ricky began performing alongside his close friend, Keith Whitley. Two teenage boys bound by the same gift, voices and instruments so raw, so honest, they moved people to tears. It was then that Ralph Stanley, a bluegrass legend, discovered them at a small show in Virginia. Stanley didn't just invite them into his band, the Clinch Mountain Boys. He placed them in front of real audiences. For the first time, Ricky felt the weight of professional stage lights on his face and understood what it meant to truly perform. From 1971 to 1974, Ricky traveled across the eastern United States with Ralph Stanley. Old buses rattling down highways, long nights falling asleep backstage, tiny, smoke-filled venues where the crowd barely filled the front rows. It was there that Ricky found his real classroom. He didn't just learn to play music, he learned how to be an artist, to keep rhythm through hardship, to sing even if only a handful were listening, and above all, to stay faithful to the melody. Then came 1975, another turning point. Ricky joined the band of J.D. Crowe, once again with Keith Whitley at his side. Here, he honed his craft not just as a musician, but as a producer and arranger. He began shaping his own identity, keeping the soul of tradition alive, while daring to breathe new life into bluegrass, drawing it closer to a younger audience. By the late 1970s, Ricky stepped onto an even bigger stage, performing with Emmylou Harris and her legendary Hot Band. These years changed everything. From a mountain boy who once played only on small-town stages, Ricky now stood before thousands in grand halls, carrying his mandolin like a living spirit. Blending the raw purity of bluegrass with the wider breadth of modern country, he began catching the attention of Nashville, a city that, in just a few years, would see him rise as one of its brightest stars. But the early years were not only opportunity, they were a trial by fire. More than once, Ricky thought about walking away, worn down by poverty, by exhaustion, by the sense that Nashville only had ears for shiny pop country, not for the humble mandolin. Yet in those weary nights, Ricky remembered. He remembered the mandolin his parents had sacrificed to buy. He remembered that evening in 1960 when Bill Monroe had pulled him on stage. Those memories became his tether, reminding him that music was never meant to buy comfort. It was meant to keep the soul intact. And so, as the 1980s dawned, Ricky Skaggs signed with Epic Records. A new chapter opened. From a poor mountain boy to a steadfast bluegrass artist, he was now ready to write the brightest pages of his career, to bring traditional music back to the very top of America. Career success. In 1981, Ricky Skaggs signed his name on a contract with Epic Records. At that time, Nashville was drowning in glossy pop country, shiny, commercial, easy to sell. Skeptics whispered, "A mandolin player still clinging to bluegrass, how could he ever compete here?" But only months later, their voices fell silent. The album Waitin' for the Sun to Shine was released. 2 #1 singles and 4 more in the top 20. For the first time in years, a traditionalist had shaken the charts to their core. Nashville was stunned. A new era had begun. And its name was Ricky Skaggs. Through the 1980s, Ricky was like a wind blowing against the current. While the industry chased bright lights and pop country glamour, he led audiences back to the raw sound of Appalachia, the fiddle, the banjo, and the sharp cry of the mandolin. Hit after hit followed: "Crying My Heart Out Over You," 1982. "I Don't Care," 1982. "Highway 40 Blues," 1983. "Don't Cheat in Our Hometown," 1983. "Uncle Pen," 1984. One after another, they climbed to #1. In just a few short years, Ricky Skaggs had 12 chart-topping songs and a shelf heavy with awards, from the CMA to the Grammys. By 1985, he reached the summit, crowned Entertainer of the Year by the Country Music Association. To the public, he was more than a star. He was the man who saved country music from being swallowed by commercialism. Even the great Chet Atkins admitted Ricky Skaggs saved country music. But glory never comes without shadows. By the late 1980s, Nashville had turned again. Pop country surged back with new giants: Garth Brooks, Clint Black, Alan Jackson. Bluegrass, the music Ricky had sworn loyalty to, was pushed once more to the margins. His albums no longer held the top spots. The press began to speak of a decline, and standing on the highest peak, Ricky suddenly found himself staring into the abyss. Friends urged him, "Change. Follow the market if you want to survive." But Ricky whispered his reply, "I was not born to chase. I was born to preserve." And so, he did what no one else dared. He turned away from the spotlight. He walked back into the shadows of bluegrass. "Outdated," Nashville scoffed. In 1997, he founded Skaggs Family Records and built the band Kentucky Thunder. Together, they began recording, touring, carrying bluegrass to audiences across the world. What seemed foolish at first became a renaissance. Over the next 2 decades, Ricky and Kentucky Thunder won more than 15 Grammys, along with countless honors from the International Bluegrass Music Association. The music once forgotten lived again, stronger, louder, eternal, thanks to the resolve of one man. And Ricky didn't stop at awards. He carried the mandolin onto the grandest stages: Carnegie Hall in New York, festivals across Europe and Asia. Wherever he stood, he appeared the same, humble, mandolin in hand, head bowed, letting the music speak for itself. In 1982, at just 28 years old, he became a full member of the Grand Ole Opry, one of the youngest ever invited into that sacred circle. And for more than 4 decades, the Opry has never been without his voice, his mandolin. For Nashville, Ricky Skaggs is not just an artist. He is part of its living memory. In October 2018, his name was etched into not one, but 2 sacred halls, the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Bluegrass Hall of Fame. Proof that Ricky Skaggs was not a star of the moment, he was and remains eternal. And even today, past 70, Ricky still walks onto the stage, the voice steady, the mandolin sharp as ever. He no longer chases charts. He no longer needs million-dollar contracts. What he brings is something rarer. Authenticity, endurance, and the unshakable faith that bluegrass will never die. Every time Ricky Skaggs strikes the strings, the audience knows they are not just hearing music. They are witnessing history, alive again. Controversy and tragedy. By the late 1980s, as Nashville surrendered itself to the wave of pop country, Ricky Skaggs suddenly found himself pushed aside. The man once hailed as the savior of country music was now branded too traditional, out of touch. The press wrote that his voice was too gentle, his style too old-fashioned, that the mandolin no longer belonged in a world lit by electric guitars and dazzling stages. From a radiant star, Ricky now felt abandoned in the dark. Those nights, singing to half-empty halls, cut like a blade. The man, who had once silenced all of Nashville, now played to rows of empty seats. Friends and colleagues urged him, change, add population, drop the bluegrass if you want to survive. But Ricky could not. He knew if he bowed to the market, he would lose his very soul. So he chose the riskier path, walking away from mainstream Nashville, back to the roots of bluegrass, a genre everyone had already declared dead. That was his professional tragedy. But the collapse of music was not the only storm he endured. In his personal life, Ricky carried scars that never fully healed. Before his enduring marriage to Sharon White, he had suffered through a bitter divorce. His first wife, Sharon Hannah, and Ricky parted ways in sorrow. Years of relentless touring, endless nights away from home, the gulf between a man always on the road and a fragile home life became too wide to cross. Ricky later admitted, "Music was the greatest love of my life, but it also took away things I could never win back." Though he eventually found love again with Sharon White of the Whites, the pain of that first broken marriage always lingered like a shadow in his memory. And tragedy did not stop there. As the years wore on, Ricky faced battles with his health. He was hospitalized more than once. Then, in 2020, came the most terrifying moment of all, a life-saving heart surgery to open a blocked artery. Doctors told him, had he waited any longer, he might not have lived. Afterward, Ricky confessed, "I saw death standing right outside my door, and I knew I had been given a second chance to live and to keep singing." It wasn't just a physical blow, it was a strike at the core of his spirit. The man who had spent thousands of nights on stage now found himself sitting still, forced to confront his own fragility. And all the while, he watched friends and mentors slip away. Keith Whitley, the brother of his youth; Ralph Stanley, the teacher who had lifted him from small-town stages into greatness. Each loss shattered another piece of memory, reminding Ricky that youth never returns, and that even music cannot stop the cruelty of time. All of it, the industry's betrayal, a marriage lost, the decline of health, the grief of losing friends, it all converged into one of the darkest chapters of Ricky Skaggs' life. And yet, he did not fall. Instead, Ricky turned pain into drive. He transformed failure into strength. In those nights of illness, in those seasons of loss, he found a deeper truth. Music was never just a way to make a living. It was the way to keep faith alive. When Ricky Skaggs returned to the stage after heart surgery, he did so with a gentle smile, silver hair, and a mandolin that still rang with fire. And the audience knew, standing before them, was not only an artist, but a man who had walked through the valley of shadows and survived to tell the story. Personal life. Behind the stage lights, Ricky Skaggs was never the kind of star who lived on constant applause. He was a simple man, always searching for balance between family, faith, and music. His first marriage ended in heartbreak, leaving wounds that took years to heal. The endless tours, the grinding pace of Nashville, the weight of fame, all of it slowly stripped away. A home that once felt unshakable. Ricky would later admit, music was the greatest love of my life, but it also took away things I could never win back. It was a painful lesson, a reminder of the price that fame demands. But destiny opened another door. In the late 1980s, Ricky found love again. With Sharon White, singer of the family group The Whites, Sharon became more than a wife. She was his partner in song, his confidant on stage. Together they sang duets. They stood side by side under the lights of the Grand Ole Opry, and more than anything, Sharon became the anchor that restored peace to Ricky's life. Their marriage has endured for more than 4 decades, a living proof that even after loss, true love can bloom, and it can redeem the soul. For Ricky, family was never just a refuge. It was a classroom of its own. He raised 4 children and never once forced them to follow his footsteps into music. To him, music was not an inheritance to be demanded, but a gift, to be embraced only by those who truly longed for it. In interviews, Ricky often spoke of his children with a soft smile. The most important thing isn't whether they stand on stage, it's whether they know how to love and how to live kindly. Beyond family, Ricky held another treasure: friendship. From his youth on the road with Keith Whitley, to the years learning under Ralph Stanley, to later collaborations with Emmylou Harris, Vince Gill, Alison Krauss, Ricky was always known as the humble, approachable friend who lifted others up. To the younger artists just finding their way, he was a gentle elder, ready to teach every note, every way to hold a stage, and most importantly, how to keep the heart soft, uncorrupted by fame. All of this flowed from an unshakable source: his Christian faith. Ricky Skaggs was a devout believer. He often said that without God, he could never have endured the losses of marriage, the collapse of career, or even the life-saving heart surgery of 2020. For him, music was never just entertainment. It was prayer, set to melody. That's why, throughout his career, Ricky wove gospel into the strings of his mandolin, turning every song into both a confession and a hymn. His philosophy of life was simple, yet profound, summed up in 3 words he repeated often: grateful, thankful, blessed. Those words carried him through broken marriages, through the grief of losing friends, through the loneliness that creeps in when the stage lights finally fade. They kept him from bitterness, from resentment, and instead made him softer, more compassionate than ever before. Today, when Ricky Skaggs steps on stage, the audience sees more than a music legend. They see a husband, a father, a friend, a humble believer, a man who has lived enough triumphs and tragedies to understand one truth: fame will fade, but love and faith remain. Legacy and influence. In the history of American music, some names flare like fireworks, brilliant but fleeting. And then there are those who burn quietly, patiently, like a steady blue flame. Ricky Skaggs is one of those. For more than 4 decades, Ricky has been more than a successful singer. He rooted bluegrass deep into the heart of Nashville. While the city chased pop country trends, he turned back to the Appalachian sound and breathed new life into it. Because of that faithfulness, audiences around the world still know the mandolin, the fiddle, and the high, lonesome sound as eternal symbols of America. Ricky's legacy is not only in the hits that once lit up the charts, songs like Highway 40 Blues, Uncle Pen, and Don't Cheat in Our Hometown. It lives in works that have outlasted their time, from the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, where he has been a member since 1982, over 40 years of devotion, to the albums of Kentucky Thunder, the band he built to carry bluegrass back to the summit. Through them, bluegrass did more than survive. It roared back to life with a power not seen in generations. In 2018, when Ricky Skaggs was inducted into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Bluegrass Hall of Fame, people called it a full-circle moment. The boy from Appalachia, who once trembled beside his idol Bill Monroe, had become a legend, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very masters who had inspired him. Ricky's influence stretched far beyond his own career. Alison Krauss, Chris Thile, Vince Gill, Marty Stewart, all of them have spoken of him as a mentor, a model of honesty in music. Even stars of pop country admitted, without Ricky Skaggs, Nashville would have long ago lost its traditional soul. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not measured in Grammys, nor in the walls of fame. It lives in the hearts of his listeners. When Ricky sings, people hear the simplicity of everyday life. They hear the poor man's supper, the fields of Appalachia, the whisper of faith and love. Ricky Skaggs proved a timeless truth. Music does not need spectacle to be immortal. It only needs to be true. And today, in his 70s, when Ricky walks onto the stage, silver-haired, mandolin in hand, the crowd still rises to its feet. Not just to applaud an artist, but to honor a man who dared to go against the tide, who endured, and who, in the end, became the symbol of a generation. The guardian who keeps bluegrass alive forever in the heart of America. Present life. In his 70s, Ricky Skaggs steps onto the stage of the Grand Ole Opry with a steady, deliberate gait. His silver hair glows beneath the golden lights, and in his hands rests the same mandolin that has carried him through a lifetime. He has nothing left to prove, because his very presence is proof enough. Each time Ricky enters that sacred wooden circle, the audience doesn't just hear music. They touch living history. His life today is quieter, but never apart from music. In the mornings, in a small room where sunlight spills through the window, he sits at a desk with a blank sheet of paper and a well-worn number, 2 pencil. He still writes the old-fashioned way, slowly, humbly, yet every note he sketches carries the weight of a lifetime's experience. He still performs with Kentucky Thunder, still appears at the Opry, and still inspires the young artists who come seeking his wisdom. The health scares, like the 2020 heart surgery that nearly ended his life, did not stop him. They only made him treasure each day more. Ricky often says, "Every morning I wake up, I feel blessed to still be singing. And that's all I need." Beyond the music, Ricky Skaggs cherishes a warm, quiet family life with his wife, Sharon White, his partner, his friend, his soulmate in art. No longer chasing fame, they are content with quiet afternoons together. Sometimes they share the stage at the Opry. Other times, they share silence, hand in hand, in their little Tennessee home. He also spends more time with friends, with community, and with the church. To young musicians, Ricky has become a spiritual father, gently guiding them, reminding them that country and bluegrass are not just genres, but ways of living, honest, humble, faithful. Today, Ricky Skaggs is no longer the name dominating the charts. He has become something far more precious, a keeper of memory, a storyteller through music, a living witness that tradition never dies so long as someone is brave enough to protect it. And so, when he sings inside the Opry Hall and the mandolin rings out, the audience hears more than a song. They hear the breath of Appalachia. They hear a life of triumphs and trials. And above all, they see before them a legend, still humble, still gentle, still holding fast to three words that define his life's philosophy: grateful, thankful, blessed. The lights of the Grand Ole Opry slowly fade. The stage stands empty, yet somewhere in the darkness, the sound of Ricky Skaggs' mandolin still lingers, needing no audience, no fireworks, just the gentle breath of Appalachia echoing on. His entire life is proof of one simple truth: music does not need noise to endure. It only needs honesty. Ricky Skaggs never chased the market, never begged for attention. He simply sang, simply played, and let time answer. And time has proven bluegrass is not dead. Tradition is not lost. A whisper, if it is true enough, can outlast even the loudest roar. When you turn off this video, you may no longer hear the mandolin. But remember, sometimes in life, amidst all the noise, all you need is something simple: a moment of truth. Ricky Skaggs lived his whole life to teach us that. And perhaps that is why he has become immortal. If this story has touched you, hit like and help keep alive the fire of authenticity in music. If you believe artists who dared to stay true to themselves, like Ricky, deserve to be remembered forever, hit subscribe and join us as we continue telling the stories of timeless legends. And most importantly, leave us a comment. What moment in Ricky Skaggs' music made you feel closest to something real? Because maybe your words, too, will become a whisper, one that carries forward the legacy Ricky Skaggs has left behind.